my eyes are down. I'm looking, and all of a sudden she's like, "I found it." And I'm like, "What do you mean? You found another speck of blood?" And she points 10 yards over to the right. Never would have looked, never would have guessed. She's like, "No, I found the deer."
Today, I'm thrilled to have a guest who embodies the true spirit of embracing the outdoors. This man walks the walk with unwavering dedication. I've been captivated by the journey of a person who rises at 4 a.m. without fail, does cold plunges, engages in intense workouts, goes hunting, fishing, and relentlessly pursues his dreams in the outdoors. What sets him apart is not just his personal quest for adventure, but his commitment to sharing these invaluable experiences with his family and especially with his daughter. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the one and only Austin Nicholas, widely known as Wilderness Father on Instagram. Austin, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Tyler. Really happy to be here.
I'd love to start off first and talk about your lifestyle on a day-to-day. What does it take to pursue all of these different things that you have? Hobbies, family, career. What's it take?
I think it takes why. It takes identifying your why in life. There are things that will always come up that are going to distract you from your goals, and relying on motivation isn't enough. So having a why is really important for making sure that you stick to what you say you're going to do and ultimately completing those tasks. So for me, it's being the best father that I can be, being the best husband I can be, and being the best part of the community that I can be in terms of my outdoor endeavors.
Gotcha. So for you, it's much more about discipline than motivation. What's the day-to-day look like for you?
Yeah, so things have been a little bit different lately because we got a wire-haired pointing Griffon puppy that is very
Up all
time
night.
demanding. Yes, he was the alpha of the litter. So he is not fond of his crate. He loves to eat all of the food, drink all of the water, and whine all night. So we've been figuring that out and how to integrate that into my schedule. But typically, my schedule looks like getting up at 4 a.m., hopping in a cold shower just to wake myself up fully. I'll go into my office and pray, meditate, read, and then write in my journal. Then I'll check some emails for work, head to the gym, do about an hour of heavy lifting, a little bit of cardio, and then I hop into the steam room and sauna. And then after that, go home and start the day. It sets me up for success. And, I think that without it, I get there, like a lot of men, I get up into my thoughts. And so having that personal win first thing is really important for me to set my course for the day.
Right. And was there anyone who motivated you to start this type of routine?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of other men, I was inspired by people like Cameron Haynes, David Goggins, Joe Rogan, the standards. But I read this book by James Clear called Atomic Habits that basically talks about your habits being a cascading waterfall, where if you want to take the guesswork out of developing a routine, then you have to enable yourself to lead from one habit to the next, right? And so, for example, he tells a story of a dance studio owner in New York City who struggled getting to the studio to get in her daily routine. And so, what she would do is she would hop in the shower and then call the cab driver.
Mm.
And that took the obligation off of her and put the obligation onto him so that there's no way that she can skip going to the dance studio, because if she did, then she would be letting somebody else down and making their life tough. And so I think that for myself, there's ways to do this, right? It's just putting yourself into a position where you cannot fail. That could be giving yourself a personal mantra that says, like, if I do this, then I get rewarded with this. Or if I don't do this, then here's my punishment for the day. For me, I just like to set these lofty goals where, if I'm not training, then this 100-mile race that I have coming up in June is going to look pretty ugly.
Where's your 100-mile race?
It's in the Beulah National Forest in southern Colorado. It's called Mesa's Hideout.
That's awesome. How long have you been training for it at this point?
I have been really focused on the strength training, and I actually did have a little bit of a scare a month ago where I went to the doctor for a routine checkup, and and they said that my vitals were good and let me know that I was going to, and I let them know that I was going to run a marathon unsupported in Hilton Head where we were going for the holidays. So they said, okay, we'll just run a quick EKG. Anyways, the nurse took me up to an EKG and said, that's weird. And then walked out of the room and then came back with the whole staff. And they basically told me that I couldn't drive to the hospital, but I needed to go to the ER right away,
What?
and that I wasn't allowed to drive. Yeah, I couldn't drive. And so ended up finding out that I have this electromagnetic block to my heart,
Mm,
and it's ultimately a genetic nuisance, but it was a pretty scary experience. And so I had been taking time off of the running. Now I've got about 4.5 months to train. So working my way up slowly. I just think for myself, a little bit different than others. I have I have a really strong mental capacity for pain. And
right.
so,
You embrace the
you know,
suck.
I yeah, so I'm not worried about the training, but it's going slowly.
Right, right. And is the heart a concern at this point, or have they given you like a clearance on it, or are you just like, screw it, I'm doing it anyways?
So they had me wear basically a patch that tracked all of the rhythms of my heart over the past week, and then I send that in, and then they just want to make sure that everything is going according to plan. But when I met with the cardiologist, they said that it's basically a genetic nuisance. My heart is healthy. There is just a block that causes my heart to skip beats intermittently. So she gave me full clearance to return back to training. And I mean, ultimately, what it served to do was give me this great appreciation of life, greater than I've already had. And this understanding that at some point we're all going to fade away. That may be tomorrow, that may be in 10 years, that may be in 50 years. But I think it's so important to be grateful for every day and not take things for granted, and really seize your potential, right? Because you never know. There's always going to be blocks in the road. There's always going to be obstacles to overcome.
Mhm.
But, I'm not going to let that stop me from doing the things that I have planned for my life.
Right. You got to live a quality life instead of focusing. I think a lot of people focus on their longevity and focus on, I want to make it to 80, 90. Like I want to push my life as far as I possibly can. And oftentimes it's at the sacrifice of their own quality of life currently, them thinking this is going to somehow harm me later in the long run, rather than focusing on this is what I want to accomplish right now. And I want to push my body and push myself mentally. Um, so that's that's good to hear. I'm glad everything seems to be okay. Are you you used to give a ton of advice on strength and conditioning and giving tips every once in a while. What's the transition from going from strength training to cardio look like? Strength training and then going to 100-mile marathon.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that they go hand in hand. It's really important to have strength as your foundation for being able to run a lot of miles.
Mhm.
However, I think that you do have to switch up and run more, right? You're ultimately going to lose muscle throughout the process, but it just comes down to building that racing foundation where you're going slow and you're going long, right? And you're not building up too fast, but you're following a program where you have a set amount of miles that you want to accomplish per week, where typically you're running lower intervals. And then on the weekends, you'll run one or two long runs. So, it's definitely a change for me. This past year, I ran, or last year, I ran the Leadville 50, and then I did an unsupported race with a buddy of mine to raise money for a charity called the Wilderness Youth Project. geared towards teaching inner city kids about wilderness education. And we ran 71 miles. We had planned for 68. We ended up running 71 because we didn't necessarily plan out the exit strategy and ended up getting shot out in this canyon. And we're like, all right, where are the girls to come pick us up? And realized that cars weren't allowed back there.
Oh
So
no.
it was brutal, man. It was really brutal.
One of my buddies just did a 35-mile race, and he was so mad when he got to the finish line because he's looking at his watch and realizing that he already hit 35 miles and he still had another 3. So the race planners screwed up on how many miles it actually was. And he didn't realize it until he went to his next checkpoint, which he thought was the end. He got to the last checkpoint and they're like, yeah, you still have 3 miles. And he's raging at this point because you spend all your energy looking at your watch going, okay, I only have 1 more mile so I can push it harder and harder and harder. And then he had to know he had a few more miles still to go.
There's a huge mental component to running long distance, right? And I mean, it's definitely it's never been more clear than when you get to that point and then you realize that you have further to go because you build up this construct in your mind that you're going to hit the finish line, right? And this happens for a lot of races, right? They can't make it perfect every time.
Right.
Some people go off course, some people do whatever they do. They do the best that they can, right? And so ultimately it comes down to really just putting one foot in front of the other. And I think it's a metaphor for life, right? You think that you've arrived, but you've still got a long way to go. And those are the times where your mental fortitude is truly tested, right? Where it's like, oh, I didn't get to where I thought I was going to be. Good. Keep going.
Right. And as far as fitness and cardio and all of this lifestyle coming into play, how do the outdoors fit into this for you?
Well, I think that in order to be a good outdoorsman, especially a big game hunter, it's so important to be physically fit, right? You are in positions where it's already strenuous on your mind when you see your target animal come in front of you and your heart's beating a million miles a minute and you might have just summited a ridge and you have to collect yourself. I think that if you incorporate a training routine into your lifestyle, then when you reach those moments, it's much easier to execute effectively.
And at what age time period did you start realizing that this is something I'm going to pursue my whole life, is the outdoors?
So growing up, I was really into the outdoors. I used to build wattle and daub huts with my little brother in the back. We would shoot squirrels with our BB guns, and my parents weren't into hunting. We lived in a predominantly urban area with woods behind our house, but didn't really know too many people that were into hunting and fishing. My dad would take me duck hunting every now and again. We actually had one hunt that we went on where we were in a muddy blind and my dad well, I got some mud stuck in the barrel and
Mhm.
my dad didn't know anything about hunting at the time, so he's like, oh, just blow it out on the next shot. And it was a cartoon the way that that barrel blew back. It could have taken out somebody's jugular. We didn't
Right.
go on too many hunts after that,
Mhm.
right? But then when we moved out to Colorado from Atlanta, Georgia, I got invited on a turkey hunt with a friend. And that first morning, watching the way that these birds work and seeing this bird just go off its head so closely to us, it made my blood curdle. And it was like this deep primal part of me that really rose up to the surface. And I realized that hunting and fishing is a fantastic way to immerse yourself in the outdoors actively, right? Where you are completely aware of your surroundings and you're not observing it passively as if you were hiking or, doing your skiing or doing something else like that. You are up to 10 on all sensations. And I think that that's a really valuable experience that translates to a lot of other components of life, just being present.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And did you develop all of these skills yourself later in life, or did you have mentors come in that you were able to learn from?
Well, I had I had Tyler Wilkinson. He was the guy that took me on that first hunt. He taught me a lot of what I know now, but the rest of it, I just dived into books and YouTube. I was a big fan of Meat Eater and, lots of like bow hunting journal and stuff like that. And then I just learned by trial and error, right?
Right.
I got out to the woods as much as I possibly could. I'm fortunate to have a wife that's very understanding of my passions
Mhm.
and actually helps enable that. And then once I started the Wilderness Father page, getting my daughter outdoors, it just became a no-brainer, right? That, I'm learning these things so that I can teach my daughter and teach the next generation about the beauty that is conservation, hunting, fishing, and an appreciation for the outdoors.
Are there any books that you'd recommend, like that really stood out for you, that really brought you to that next level?
Well, all of Stephen Rinella's books are great. I was the biggest fan of the Scavenger's Guide to Haute Cuisine
Mm.
because I'm a huge cook. I love cooking, and that's a big reason why I hunt is so that my family can get meat from an organic source where we know exactly where it's coming from,
Mhm.
and just the pursuit of this like 13 course meal for all of his friends, sourcing ingredients from all over the country, really inspired me. I've also read, I got a lot of inspiration from Cameron Haynes, both of his books, Endure and the other book that he put out a little bit earlier. And a huge inspiration of mine is Theodore Roosevelt, The Life of Theodore Roosevelt. I believe the book is by Edmund Morris. It's a trilogy about the life of Theodore Roosevelt, and just hearing about his exploits as a rancher and a general and a pioneer, right? Going out onto the prairie and sourcing his own game and getting into precarious situations was has been incredibly inspiring for me. And I ended up naming our dog Theo after Theodore Roosevelt. So
Awesome. Yeah, he was
yeah,
a true historical badass. If you look through all of history at all these different people, especially in the United States, Theodore Roosevelt stands on top as far as an outdoorsman badass to look up to. And I actually need to read more books about him because I'm always looking at all these little articles and all these facts that pop out about him. But I'd love to do a deep dive into his life.
yeah, he had a really difficult life. He himself suffered from various physical ailments. He lost family members. He lost his entire ranch during this devastating winter storm. Um, he he did it all, right? He truly made every second count, and he risked a lot to accomplish his dreams, and he was authentic, right? I think that that is something that people crave. It's so easy to bullshit your way through life today, whether it be at work or at the grocery store or in relationships with people that you might love. It's easy to cop out on things. That's one thing that he didn't do. He always showed up and he wasn't afraid to state his opinion, even if it was contrary to uh, the flow of common thought.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're totally right. That's something that's really easy to get into the habit of is whenever you don't want to do something, it's so easy to just not do it in today's world. Um,
Yeah.
as far as getting into precarious situations, what is one of the most memorable precarious situations you've gotten into in your outdoor experiences?
You know, I love solo hunting. I think that one set of footsteps is always better than two. Not to say that I don't like hunting with other people, but I've definitely been spent most of my hunting career alone, hunting outside, and I've had close calls with bears. I've had close calls with bears and their cubs,
Mhm.
and I would say my second season out bow hunting for elk, I had a bear false charge me to within like 20 or 30 yards, and that about made me shit my pants.
Yeah, black bear.
Yeah, black bear.
Yeah,
Big one though.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny around here, and for black bear around here, we have mostly very small bears around here. Like I feel like I'm bigger than most of these bears around here. But every once in a while, you run into a giant, and you feel the intimidation factor as soon as you hit a big bear, where this is his area. Did it false charge and then immediately retreat? Did you feel like you needed to jump back or fall back, or what was your instincts there?
It happened so quickly that I didn't really know what to do. I mean, you like to think that if a bear's charging you, that
Oh
you're going to
yeah.
be able to pull up the sidearm and get
Right.
4 shots off center mass, but it's just not the case most of the time. So what he did is he ran in, and then I'm not even sure that he was necessarily going for me.
Mhm.
Maybe he was just, running away from something or running to something that he thought he saw.
Mhm.
But
Oh,
he
so it was
sort
just
of
out of
just
nowhere.
forked off. Yeah, yeah. I was coming to this clearing, and he was coming across the field, and
Mm.
then
Yeah.
just kind of all happened so quickly, and then you're sort of left wondering what could have happened after, and
Right.
then you're by yourself, right? So you
Mm.
can't commiserate with anybody else. You just kind of go about your way, and
Mm. Yeah, and it's funny because, you know, and I think all hunters have to deal with this especially when you are hiking in the dark, early morning before the sun's up. You're hiking in the dark by yourself, and all these instinctual thoughts start running through your brain about what would I do if something jumped out at me? What would I like? And you have, especially if you haven't experienced any of that, you have this inclination that, oh, I would pull out my pistol, I'd take out bear spray, I would do. And ultimately, I think the thing that's helped me just push through the mountains is going, there's nothing I can do. There's literally nothing I can do until it's happening. Then I can assess and do what I need to, but it's usually going to take that thing grabbing a hold of you in the middle of the night. There's no way you're going to out of nowhere in the mid while you're hiking in the dark spot something and be able to do something before it's on you if it wants to be on you. The area that we live, we have wolves, we have mountain lions, we have bear. We don't have any grizzlies, which I like. But the thing that I'm most worried about always is moose. And it's just from childhood experiences of moose out of nowhere, completely still as you walk past them, charging you or trying to run you over in the dark. So those are always my big animals that I'm worried about when I start walking.
yeah, moose are incredibly aggressive. I was out deer hunting a couple months ago, and I hadn't had much exposure to moose previously, but I heard this like a grunting roar in the woods, and it made me take pause, and finally saw this moose, and he was about 30 yards from me, and he could tell that I was there for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's they're giant animals.
Oh
When
yeah.
you get up close to them, are giant animals, and they will not hesitate to get you out of their area if that's something that they want to do.
Yeah.
So I put a tree between me and him, and watch the show and
Mm.
hoped that he didn't come any closer. Unfortunately, he didn't.
Have you had any precarious situations where you pushed yourself too far in the mountains, or you felt like maybe I pushed myself too far because I'm back here? You either shot an animal or you're just in the middle of nowhere, realizing you need to get out and maybe you've pushed it too far in.
Yeah, yeah. One of my first hunting seasons, I went out with a buddy of mine, and we saw some elk way down in this draw, and we were up on top of this ridge. So we hiked down in there, and stupidly, the both of us decided that we were going to drop our packs, including all water, and hike down in there
Mm.
to put the stock on a bull. And there was no water down in there, and it was one of the stupidest decisions that I've ever made, was to go down into a place with no water, no supplies other than my bow, and ended up just being sick with thirst and feeling like, man, it's when you get caught up into something, sometimes you'll walk further than you anticipate. But one, when you're walking downhill, it's a lot easier than walking uphill.
Mhm.
And two, if you get lost, or if you get onto the trail of an animal, all of that sense of direction sort of goes out the window. And fortunately, we had Onyx and stuff like that, but the lack of water just really gets to you, right? Especially if it's a day where it heats up and you're just sort of out of luck.
Mhm. Yeah, that's it. And it's funny because, I've seen there's two different sides to this of how people end up getting into the outdoors, right? You have people like me who had parents and parents, friends who were mentors who really taught me all of these different experiences growing up. Whether I follow them, whether I follow those things is one thing. Then you have another group similar to yourself where you dive in, you read books, you do all of this stuff, and then sometimes you miss the really important things that a mentor would say, hey, do not do this. And that was one of those that my mentors were like, every time you think you should drop your pack, don't drop your pack. And I still, even when I am, and I, even when I am pursuing archery elk and I know that the elk is just over the ridge, but I don't know how far I'm going to have to sneak to it, I still am keeping my pack on until I absolutely am ready to drop it, drop the boots, get my wool socks, and sneak towards it. But even then, I mean, Onyx is a great tool because I'm marking my pack exactly where it's at. I've hung my pack in trees where I'm like, I'll easily be able to find that. And then I come back to it an hour later after stock, and I'm like, where did that pack go? Snow sometimes has covered my tracks, and I'm like, I don't even know where I left it on this ridge. And you can be in rough shape if you if you lose a pack on the mountain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so many resources out there today that can enable hunters that don't have family members to get into the sport. And it's an incredible thing. Social media, I've been able to connect with so many like minded individuals just as a result of connecting on somebody else's page that I look up to. I've made great friends on there. Um, so I don't think that that's necessarily a barrier to entry, but it definitely is helpful to not have to reinvent the wheel related to mistakes in the field and learn from your elders.
Oh yeah, yeah. And even on the other end, I used to go steelhead fishing with this guy where I thought I knew everything I needed to steelhead fish. And it was from mentors teaching me this is how this is the process. But I had this guy who was completely self-taught. He was literally reading books as we were driving to go steelhead fishing about steelhead fishing. And sure enough, that guy wiped the floor with us because he was learning all of these new techniques where I was just implementing old things that maybe these steelhead have seen or they're just used to or whatever. But he was implementing all these new techniques and he was getting insight from people across the United States, not just in an isolated location of how to catch these steelhead. And he wiped the floor with us. So there's definitely benefits to each type of upbringing in this. And I love, there's a lot of people who give Steve Ranella and those guys a lot of shit for how much they've enabled people who know nothing about the outdoors to come into the outdoor space, and people worried about my spots being stolen, my fishing spots no longer good because of all these guys. But man, how could you not want for other people to have what you have? To have that purpose in the outdoors. I can't imagine keeping everything so isolated within myself and never sharing that with anybody.
Yeah. So people like Steve Ranella, they put the outdoors into a digestible format for people who might not necessarily be exposed to the outdoors. So I don't see that as a bad thing.
Mhm.
our conservation for the future hinges on more people getting into the outdoors.
Mhm.
So the argument about spots getting stolen, I would just say go deeper, right? You got to
Mhm.
work harder because a lot of people are lazy, and especially if they're just getting into the outdoors and hunting and fishing, they're gonna dip their toes in. That might take up the readily available spots, but it's a big country. There's a lot of land, and there's great opportunities to go further and deeper to be able to get on bigger fish, bigger game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not like, I have my spots that I take people, especially fishing, that I'm going to take my daughter to, who's 2.5, that I'm going
Exactly.
to hold that spot for her and it's going to be our special spot. That's your right as an outdoorsman. But to just never want anybody to experience what you're experiencing, to me, is just such a selfish thing. And you don't understand the bigger picture of conservation. The only thing that keeps a lot of this land public and accessible is the outdoorsmen that are utilizing it, that are paying for the tags to experience it. And it's the greatest form of government conservation that we have, that we fund.
Absolutely.
Um, as far as sharing experiences with friends and family, when did you realize my daughter is when did you realize I need to teach my daughter everything that I possibly can about the outdoors so that she also has that in her life?
Yeah, so my wife and I have always been very passionate about sharing knowledge of the outdoors and appreciation for the wilderness with our daughter. We've been taking her hiking with us since she was 6 months old. And I had been documenting this throughout the entire process just because parents love their children and they want to savor the memories, right? And then we got to a point where she was able to sort of hold her own, right, and be quiet in the woods. And I took her out on a turkey hunt, and she was quiet. She was into it. And it was an experience that we relished together. She talked about it for days afterwards. And I realized that this could be inspirational to others that didn't know where to start with their kids in terms of getting them outside. And my ultimate mission is to show people how easy it is. If you can gamify the experience of hiking and hunting for children, then you can kindle that love for the outdoors within them, and it sets them free. I mean, me personally, it has not been an easy road for me. I was a very rebellious kid, but the outdoors was always an anchor for me. And I think that's something that it develops resilience in people, right? Because there's no bullshitting the mountain.
Mhm.
It develops an appreciation for the little things, right? They don't need fancy tools and gear and stuff to get outside. All they have to do is know where they are, know where they're going and where they need to return back to, and have food and water and, solid pair of boots, and the world is your oyster.
Mhm.
And it being out in the woods, it inspires creativity in children that is lacking today. So it was a natural progression for us, right? Once she started getting into it, getting into the idea of catching a fish or putting the stock on an animal, it just strengthened our bond. And, as a result, we're able to use this content to inspire other parents to become better people overall, better stewards of these living beings that they've brought into the world. And they can also share those experiences with their kids and create lasting memories.
That's awesome. And can you share any specific adventures that you've had with your daughter that you knew, oh, she's getting it. This is clicking in.
Yeah, I mean, we killed a doe together at the end of last year, and we had to. I guess I bumped the rifle during my previous elk hunt because I was dead nuts on this deer at like 80 yards, and there was blood all over the place. But we ended up putting on this super long track job
Wow.
all through like late into the evening, and then called it quits, went and got some Chinese food and came back the next day.
Mhm.
And we were about to give up, man. We were in the deer stand. She's like, Dad, I want to go I want to go home and take a bubble bath. And, I'm sitting there like, we owe it to the deer 20 more minutes, and she's
Right.
5 years, right? She's like, okay, I guess I understand. But it
Mhm.
was a teaching moment, right? So we go back out and find the last little speck of blood
Mhm.
that we've been able to find. I had her on a backpack carrier, so she's set up a little bit higher than I was,
Mhm.
and my eyes are on the ground. Finally, I see one speck of blood leading into a different direction, and so my eyes are down. I'm looking, and all of a sudden, she's like, "I found it." And I'm like, "What do you mean? You found another speck of blood?" And she points 10 yards over to the right. Never would have looked, never would have guessed. She's like, "No, I found the deer." And lo and behold, there the deer was. And she was so excited. It gave her this great feeling of accomplishment to be able to assist her dad, me, with finding this majestic animal. And I mean, we were both so grateful for recovering an animal because I've been in that situation before. Fortunately, I've never not been able to recover a deer or anything like that. But I've definitely come close, and it puts this heavy pit in your stomach just because this animal sacrificed its life
Mhm.
for your family, and so it was just an incredible experience that we got to share together.
That's awesome. And do you, I'm always talking to my wife about, what age is too young for them to be seeing the whole butchering process, field dressing, all of that. And ultimately, we've realized that our daughter, even at 2.5, really does understand the meat is coming from this deer because she's experienced it all. She's experienced seeing a deer being drug out. She's ridden deer while I'm dragging them out. And every single meal that we have, we sit down and she thanks every animal involved with that meal. She thanks the deer for its body. She thanks the pig for the bacon. And so we think she understands a lot of these concepts because she's been introduced to it at such a young age. And obviously, I'm not gutting it in front of her at 2.5 or anything like that. But do you have any insight on what's age appropriate, and is there an age appropriate to this?
Yeah, I think it's so important to introduce your kids to these concepts early. Blood and guts and processing animals is a part of life, and
Mhm.
it's something that we've become so far removed from uh, by the powers that be that want us as reliant as possible
Mhm.
on all of this spoon fed crap from corporations that, I think it's more important than ever to teach your kids young. And by introducing them later, all it's going to do is make them feel more alienated from the process. So for me and the way that my daughter approach it, I think it's so important to um, introduce them to the meat first, right?
Mhm.
Introduce them to the final product, and then go backwards, right? And leading all the way up to the butchering process. It's not going to be pretty, right? But it's real, it's raw, and it's a visceral part of life that if you want to take part in the environment, there's some rough stuff around the edges.
Mhm. Well, and you have such a big following, I imagine, of families and parents that are really either they've already introduced their kids to this and this is part of who they are and what they do, or they are on the same page as going, I don't want to be just getting my processed meat from the grocery store. I want my kids to experience where their food comes from. And I'm sure that that's a big part of your following is people wanting to step into this and wanting to bring their families and their kids into this type of lifestyle. What would you suggest for people who are just wanting to start out? What's the first steps that they should do?
I would say learn from others, right? There are so many abundant resources available to you on the internet. And, don't stop there. You have to get out there. You
Yeah.
have to take the first step, go on a hike with your family. It's not going to be easy, right? There's a lot more preparation involved in bringing a young child out into the wilderness. It's important to plan accordingly, so that you could be safe for you and your entire family. But you have to get out there, right? It's one thing to read books. You can read all of the books that you want, but without application, it's all hearsay, right? You need to experience it for yourself. And so I would say start small, right? If you're looking to get into hunting, start with small game and work your way up from there. That could be a duck hunt, that could be hunting squirrels with a 22, right? And figure out that process, master it, and move on to something bigger. If you go straight into elk, chances are you'll be fine, but it's a lot of work and it's not a pretty process, right? But if you can start small, you can build a foundation to work up to bigger, more ambitious outdoor activities.
Yeah, absolutely. And to add on to that, an easy way to start showing your kids where meat comes from and an easy way where they can find success is fishing. Find your local
Yeah.
kids fishing pond that you can do the absolute basics where you're going to the gas station, I mean, this is how, most families start is buy a $30 rod and reel combo, get a worm, find that pond, cast it in for the kid and watch their face as they reel in their first fish. And then explain the whole process of we take this fish home, we eat it, we fillet it, show them how to cook it. And yeah, that's an easy way to just get started right away. Very basic, very easy. And you're going to figure out mistakes even in doing the very basics. But to me, that's how I always start is jump in, realize the mistakes you make, and then improve on them the next time.
Absolutely. And I would also add that here in Colorado, we have a wonderful parks and wildlife organization that offers so many different workshops to people that are looking to get into hunting and fishing and ATVing and all sorts of different activities. And these are things that our taxes pay for, right? So these are resources that we should use. And the people that work at these organizations are desperate to mentor the next generation into understanding how to hunt and fish, but also to take an active role in conservation so that we can keep these traditions alive. So I've heard, at least in Colorado, that you can go to various branches of parks and wildlife and actually rent out free gear, like ice fishing gear, to be able to take your family out for the day, right? So there are so many abundant resources to be able to do that. You don't even necessarily need to buy your own gear.
Right. Yeah, that's totally true. And I know there's so many programs like that in Idaho. And even taking the very basic steps of hunter safety with your kids. If you don't have hunter safety and you're realizing you want your kid to get into this because you live in that type of area, take hunter safety with them and do it in person if it's available. You don't have to do it online. There are usually in-person classes where it's much more hands-on experience. You're out in the field shooting. I would recommend starting that. Definitely any sort of gun safety classes would be paramount to making sure that you do that if you're going to be in the woods wanting to do any sort of hunting. Lots of government resources that we are already paying for. You might as well take advantage of them.
Exactly.
Well, first, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome. And I definitely want to do another one with you because it feels like we barely scratched the surface if you're up for it. Do you have any last minute, nonprofits or anything like that you want to give a shout out to? I know you talked about the Wilderness Run. What was that? Yeah. If you want to.
Wilderness Youth Project. Yeah, Wilderness Youth Project is a great organization. They support kids learning about outdoor education. I will say this summer, I plan to run workshops for fathers that are looking to gain outdoor experience as well as be better fathers and husbands and community builders. So I'm going to be releasing information about that on my website. I'm also doing lots of giveaways regularly to give back to my audience and enable them to be able to get out into the outdoors and pursue these hobbies that have brought such meaning to my life. So I would just say follow me on Wilderness Father. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, but primarily post to Instagram just because I found great success there. And, I think it's a very organic way to get messages out. And yeah, I just really appreciate you having me on the podcast.
Of course, yeah, and we'll have to do it again. We have spring fishing season coming up where I'm going to be talking a lot about big bass. So I don't know how much you get to do bass fishing or anything like that, but it'd be fun to recap after the spring or sometime in the spring. And then, yeah, whenever the invitation always stands, whenever you're in Idaho, if you want to go do anything in the outdoors, I am available. Happy to take you out and show you what I know around this area.
I appreciate that, Tyler. I will definitely be taking you up on that, sir.
Awesome. Thanks, man. I appreciate you coming on, and we'll do it again.